Governor, your time is up. The overwhelming consensus among scientists is that the Earth's climate is warming at an unprecedented rate. Margaret?
Consensus? You pontificating pinhead? That is not how real science works. Welcome to my wildly unprofessional slide presentation, which I have named in dishonor of this giant oaf, an inconvenient doof. Some 15 to 20 years ago, Al Gore made a movie that took about 90 minutes to convince the world mankind is causing Earth's climate to change by burning fossil fuels and pumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. In a matter of minutes and about 5 slides, I am going to refute that contention. I'm going to show you that your governments have been wasting and continue to waste inconceivable amounts of the tax money they collect from you, trying to fix a problem they don't even understand. In the extended presentation, I'm going to explain the problem is probably fairly easily and cheaply fixed, and fixed much more quickly than you have been led to believe could happen. Introducing an inconvenient doof, an explanation of why we know for a fact climate change is not caused by mankind's carbon dioxide emissions. A true greenhouse is built from glass. Visible light passes through the clear glass where it is absorbed by the greenhouse's plants, soil, and other contents. Visible green light is reflected back out through the glass by the plants, and that's why we say they are green. You could argue they're every color except green, since that's the one they don't absorb. Anyway, some portion of the absorbed visible light energy is radiated outward as infrared waves. While the glass is transparent to visible light, it can reflect infrared waves back into the greenhouse and thereby keep the interior warmer than it otherwise would be. Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth foolishly tried to make this analogy to greenhouse gases forming a blanket around the Earth and warming it up. Lots wrong with that, which we'll get into in due course, but the depiction of reflection shown here is wrong and dumb. Carbon dioxide and all other greenhouse gases do not reflect anything. It is a more complicated process that I'll get into if you hang in here long enough. But let's look at where they took this stupidity. What evidence do the climate change bean brains present to support their contentions? Ice core data such as shown above. The green line in the middle charts atmospheric carbon dioxide levels, while the blue line at the top shows average global temperature variations. Holy cause and effect, Batman! Every time carbon dioxide levels go up, the temperature goes up. But does it really? Take a closer look. Oopsie daisy, not as closely correlated as first glance would suggest. Still a bit difficult to tell at this scale, but plenty of places show the temperatures going down while carbon dioxide levels are still rising. You're probably confused about the beforeness and afterness shown here because of the bizarre scale chosen for this graph. For some reason, it is plotted as years ago. This is a really inefficient way to graph something because you're required to move all of the data to the right to add each new year on the left. Now, I'm not saying they're trying to hide anything, but it makes it harder to read. Pick any 2 points on the graph that are left and right of each other. Point B has happened after point A because B is fewer years ago or closer to now. Get it? That's a D- for clarity, graph boy. But exactly what is that offset? The old truth terrorist is enough a zealous weirdo to spend his time throwing the graph into his computer-aided design system, setting the dimension scale to directly read out years, and getting busy on that data. You can see the red arrow indicates the scale of 50,000 years. Now look at the other numbers above the blue temperature line. As the young folks would say, WTF. Those carbon dioxide peaks have happened centuries or millennia after the temperature peaks they supposedly caused. I'm not sure how it works on your planet, but on planet Truth, causes happen BF4 effects, not after, period. We use that expected time order as a solid clue to tell one from the other. But being a real man of science, I sat down to ponder what could cause what was obviously a skew of the data. After all, the world's most preeminent climate scientists couldn't possibly be wrong with their greenhouse theory, could they? Or could they? Remember a couple slides back how I said greenhouse gases don't reflect infrared waves? Yeah, truth terrorist hackles had started to come up early on as I got a whiff of inaccuracy. Anyway, about that data skewing. After literally 15 to 20 minutes of thought, I had developed a possible explanation. The ice that was cored for climate data gets formed by annual accumulations of snow that don't melt. As newer layers get added, their weight compresses the layers below until they become solid ice. Fortunately for climate science, ice has little pockets of ancient atmosphere trapped in it, and we can analyze the composition of that atmosphere to make fun graphs like we've been looking at. Now, since the ice below is not permeable to gas, but the snow layers above have at least some level of permeability, it's possible there might be some movement of gas from older layers that aren't solid ice yet to newer layers above them as the compression progresses. So my laboratory of the mind has hit on a possible explanation for the data skew. Unfortunately, that lab is great for qualitative studies, that is what's happening, but very limited on quantitative data, that is how much. In other words, could this farting upward effect account for the skew and rightly put the carbon dioxide cause ahead of the temperature change effect? Well, it turns out that even some pesky nobody like truth terrorists can make a few waves in social media if they're persistent enough. If you post things like greenhouse gases don't reflect, the process is absorptivity and emissivity, and the emissivity can happen in any direction. Some of these serious people with PhDs may see it. They will get embarrassed and they are forced to react, even though only they, me, and other science nerds know what in hell I'm talking about. This is the greenhouse effect depiction you'll find prevalent these days instead of the first one we saw. Reflection gone, replaced by the image above, which I'd say has a whole lot less impact if you're trying to convince people your human-caused global warming hypothesis is valid. And post things on social media like the ice core data show carbon dioxide peaks happen after the temperature peaks enough times, and the serious people with PhDs will pour a decade or so into coming up with the same explanation I did, then trying to calculate the amount the farting upward process would skew their data. That's something I wasn't able to do. The answer they came up with is the skew is more like 200 to 300 years, depending upon the reporting group and the data set, but still with carbon dioxide peaking after temperatures. The snippet above is from an article in Scientific American. I love the quote, the idea that there was a lag of CO2 levels behind temperature is something climate change skeptics pick on. Yes, yes, I did. And you're welcome. What kind of attitude is that? Well, you're making us prove our science makes sense. Well, sheesh. Like I promised you, in a few minutes and 5 slides, at this point, we can pretty confidently state climate change is not caused by carbon dioxide. To the people making that claim, stick a fork in them, they are done. But it's about to get seriously nerdy in here as I explain what I think is going on, and I'm afraid some of you might tune out. Before that happens, let me encourage you to take action. The people of this planet have a right to demand answers from their governments about why those governments have legislated mandates, spent hundreds of billions in taxes, and obligated trillions in taxes to be spent in the future, all in pursuit of trying to fix a problem they clearly do not understand. They have no business gambling with our lives and livelihoods on a hunch. Climate change pseudoscience is yet another abuse of the scientific process, like we saw during the COVID pandemic. In particular, if I was a young person, I would be absolutely effing raging by now that some of the same morons who locked me in my house for 2 years over a flu virus that had virtually no chance of really hurting me have also been cramming this climate change fairy tale down my throat since grade school. I would never, ever give these idiots a chance to have any control over my life, such as by voting any of their true believers into office. Understand, I'm not saying I think climate change isn't real. I just have a different explanation than carbon dioxide, and it has the benefit of actually fitting the data. Even if we're not ready to say what causes the temperature variations we see in that ice core data, let's ask ourselves, what causes the carbon dioxide variations? It turns out Earth has a natural carbon cycle that creates carbon dioxide even in the absence of evil, dirty mankind killing their home planet with hideous fossil fuels. Depicted in the figure above, we can see silicate and carbonate rock weathering actually removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, while marine organisms release it when they build their protective shells. Assuming those marine organisms react to their environment rather than create it, they should not be a cause of variation. If the amount of silicate and carbonate rock weathering somehow changed, that could be a variation. But it would seem to require a variation in the total surface area of those types of rocks to cause a variation in their per time weathering rate. And how could the surface area of those types of rocks, change very much? On the right side of the figure is an obvious source of variation, volcanic eruptions. High heat below the ground in contact with those old seashell-filled seabeds separates the carbon dioxide and belches it out of the volcano's mouth. Volcanic activity comes and goes, so could this be the variation we see in the ice core data? Here's another depiction of the carbon cycle that gives a more detailed look at the volcanic part. You can see the carbon-rich seabed getting subducted below a continental plate into hot magma. This ultimately results in carbon dioxide outgassing. What isn't shown in this or the previous image is that carbon dioxide producing microbes live in our topsoil. All bakers and brewers are familiar with these types of organisms because they provide the mechanism of producing some types of bread, plus beer, wine, and other food and beverage products. Bread rises due to yeast in the dough creating bubbles of carbon dioxide. Any baker can tell you this process can be sped up by putting the dough in a warm place and slowed or stopped by putting it somewhere cool or cold. Right away, that's interesting. Increasing atmospheric temperature from some currently unknown cause could actually be causing increased carbon dioxide output by the organisms in the soil. We've already seen how temperature leads carbon dioxide in the ice core data, and production of carbon dioxide by soil microbes would certainly follow temperature changes around. So let's keep that piece of information in mind as we go forward. So what can be this unknown cause that varies and causes Earth's temperature to vary? First off, there are many, many variables in the climate system. Naming just a few would include all three forms of heat transfer: convection, conduction, and radiation, chemistry, geology, biology, incompressible and compressible fluid mechanics, matter phase changes, astrophysics, orbital mechanics. I could probably go on. In short, Earth's climate is a result of an incredibly complex set of interactions. The willingness of the climate pseudoscientists to definitively state their certainty of a single cause of climate change among such complexity flies in the face of what truth terrorist knows as an applied science guy, more commonly known as an engineer. In fact, my skepticism of that kind of definitive talk by them was the main driver of my pursuit of climate change truth. Anyway, if people need climate change explained as a single cause, maybe volcanism can still be it. It's a good candidate, if for no other reason than because it's been around since long before mankind. So it could account for those ancient ice core variations. Unsurprising yet interesting is the main component of volcanic gas is water vapor, 60% or more. Unsurprising because what's found underground pretty much anywhere you drill a hole? Water. Interesting because water vapor is a very potent greenhouse gas. In fact, it probably accounts for more than 95% of the, I'll say, misnomered greenhouse effect. So let's look at water vapor. This type of image should be familiar to most people. The cycle of water on Earth, speculated upon or known from times as ancient as the famous Greek men of science, it shows moisture evaporating off open water or wet soil, rising up in the atmosphere where it cools, condenses, and is returned to the surface as rain, sleet, hail, or snow, only to repeat the cycle. We also see transpiration, basically plant sweating, playing a part in the cycle. Certainly, mammals also sweat, but that is apparently deemed too unimportant to include in this depiction. But one other missing element is the water vapor contribution of volcanoes. Remember, we're looking for variations in the system that could cause temperature change. Unless something acts to change temperature in the system diagrammed above, it's essentially a terrarium-like steady state. The surface areas of open water and wet land aren't changing, and short of humans hacking down trees and otherwise transforming the land, there shouldn't be great changes in plant transpiration because remember, the ice core data goes well back before humans were making those kind of changes to any real extent. You might rightly ask, does volcanic water vapor represent a significant variance to what's naturally, air quoting naturally, there in terrarium Earth steady state? Well, good old Mother Nature provides us with some timely and highly relevant data. Like the slide says, a massive volcano erupted under the sea near Tonga in January 2022. Serious people with PhDs reckon that this explosion mechanically threw a volume of water equivalent to 58,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools into our stratosphere. They also reckon this served to increase the total stratospheric water vapor content by 5%, and that amount of variation would cause a couple or few years of global warming. Warning, if you're a pseudoscience weasel or politician running on stopping climate change, The damn last thing you want to be doing is supplying truth terrorists with some hard numbers like that, because I loves calculating me some stuff. Does increasing water vapor cause warming? Well, like the previous slide said, climate scientists talking about that volcano seem to think so. And interesting, because the climate change weenies claim Earth is warming in recent years, and here is a graph showing the stratosphere's increasing water vapor content from 1980 to 2003. And here's a chart that graphs average global temperature change against the concentration of atmospheric water vapor over the last 130 years or so. Those are extremely correlated real-time measurements, not proxies such as used in the ice core data. Speaking of the ice core data, atmospheric water vapor content is obviously not going to appear as a line among that data because, well, the medium is frozen water. The real questions are, one, could the chart above be extrapolated back through the errors in the ice core data? And two, are water vapor changes causing temperature changes, or are temperature changes causing the water vapor changes? It's not a secret that warmer air can hold more water vapor, or that water will evaporate faster if you warm it up, right? So are we looking at cause or effect here? Well, if volcanic activity was increasing these days and thereby increasing the atmosphere's water vapor content, I think somebody would have noticed the extra eruptions and said something, because it really seems newsworthy. The aforementioned Tonga eruption that kicked off our Year of the Lord 2022 sure made the news. But if volcanism is not increasing in recent years, then what? I said a minute ago that this depiction of the hydrological cycle was missing the possibly significant input of volcanic activity. There are a couple other things missing that are direct results of human activity and could be significant. Stoichiometry. Now, there's a word that doesn't come up in everyday conversation. If you're not familiar, let's just say it defines what goes into a chemical reaction and what comes out. The reaction depicted in the figure is natural gas being burned. Natural gas is something of an outlier as fossil fuels go because it has one carbon atom and four hydrogen atoms. Most fossil fuels, also known as hydrocarbons, have two hydrogen atoms for each carbon atom. There can be even or odd numbers of carbon atoms, so the two bullet list entries are the stoichiometric equations for combusting the various hydrocarbon configurations. N up there stands for the number of carbon atoms. What you notice right away is these reactions produce carbon dioxide, which the climate change believers have made damn sure we know through their constant harping. But it also produces water vapor, kind of like volcanoes, huh? Okay, so burning hydrocarbons makes water vapor. Can the amount being produced possibly be significant in the big picture? Remember a couple slides back when I said the last thing you want to do on the other side of an argument with truth terrorists is to give them some hard numbers? Well, here we go. 1 ton equals 2,000 pounds. 1 barrel of the sort used to measure oil is 44 US gallons. 1 gallon of oil is approximately 7 pounds. 1 gallon of fresh water is approximately 8 pounds. The global daily oil consumption is about 110 million barrels a day. Global daily coal consumption is about 22 million tons a day. 110 million barrels times 44 gallons per barrel times 7 pounds per gallon divided by 2,000 pounds per ton equals about 17 million tons of oil. Combusted hydrocarbons yield 43% water vapor by weight according to stoichiometric equations, and 22 million tons of coal plus 17 million tons of oil times 2,000 to get to pounds. 43% of that divided by 8 pounds per gallon, and you get 4.2 billion gallons per day. Tonga eruption through 58,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools at about 660,000 gallons each, varies depending on what source you find, but that's about 38 and a push billion gallons. 4.2 billion is a percent of 38 and a quarter billion is 11%. So fossil fuel combustion is equivalent to about 1 Tonga eruption every 9 days. That's 40 Tonga eruptions every year. That seems significant to me. And I'm only accounting for fossil fuel use here. It turns out that burning organic fuels like wood, cow chips, forests, grasslands, and what have you could add quite a bit more to this total, and that's not even the end of it. Back to this one again. I said earlier that I don't really see any ways this cycle would have variations. That is, since the surface area of open water, the amount of plant coverage, and the area of wet soil shouldn't really vary in this model, it should be pretty much a steady state. Adding volcanoes and fossil and organic fuel combustion to this model would provide a means of variation. But there's one more thing that could provide a variation through mankind's activities. Suppose humans were pumping water from underground and irrigating land on a massive scale to grow crops. Don't suppose that we are doing it. We're merely pumping entire aquifers dry and spreading the water across arid lands with very high evaporative losses. That increases the otherwise constant surface area of wet soil for evaporation shown in the figure above, doesn't it? Furthermore, we use surface sources for irrigation as well. For example, on a map, the Aral Sea's surface area seems to have massively shrunk over recent years. However, its effective evaporative surface area has actually massively increased because its feeding waters have been spread much more thinly over surrounding lands as surface irrigation. Okay, so we're making lots of water vapor, so what? Well, this is as good a place as any to note that water vapor isn't really all that common. We're familiar with the nearly vaporous, partially condensed visible forms like steam, clouds, and fog, but pure single molecule water vapor, not so much. We know air is humid to some extent, but we feel that. We don't see it. If you'd like to experience some actual water vapor, wait for a hot summer day, then hold your hand in front of your running car's exhaust pipe for a while. You'll find water vapor condensed there on your hand. Because, like I said on the previous slide, 43% of the weight of the gas in your tank is coming out of the tailpipe as water vapor. No visible steam, but a moist hand. I said earlier that water vapor is a potent greenhouse gas, and in fact, the most important one. Why is that? When I made a reference to absorptivity and emissivity, I said few people would know what I'm talking about. With apologies for the image and my poor explanation, here it is. When molecules absorb radiation, their electrons move to higher energy states. When those electrons move to a lower energy state, radiation is emitted. It's not necessary that absorption and emission happen at the same wavelengths. If it were, the greenhouse effect wouldn't work. Quick review, a greenhouse depends on its contents getting warmed by visible light being absorbed by the plants, then the plants emitting infrared or heat waves that are trapped by the glass. Visible and infrared are different wavelengths, so the absorption and emission can be asymmetric. But what is required is that the wavelengths correspond to the possible electron energy states of the emitting molecules. These are very specific and can only have certain values. The bright lines in the figure above compare various elements and their spectral interactions. This property is useful in mass spectrometry, which uses these patterns to analyze an unknown material's composition and determine the constituents. Okay, why is any of this important in the context of our climate change discussion? Because of this picture. Since Earth's surface is somewhere between 70 and 80% open water, that infrared radiation shown heading upwards here must be primarily composed of the wavelengths that water molecules can emit and can also absorb. So the radiating open water and airborne water vapor must interact as strongly and specifically as radio transmitter and receiver on the same frequency. While I'm on this image, why do these climate change boneheads keep wanting to put greenhouse gases high in the atmosphere? It seems they can't get over the original Inconvenient Doof, Al Gore, and his notion of a blanket up there warming the Earth. This calls for a quick lesson in atmospheric composition. In round terms, we have 78% nitrogen and 21% oxygen. That's 99% of everything, just counting those two. Of the remaining 1%, 93% of that is argon, and a piddling amount of the remaining tiny fraction is everything else. Now that's for dry air. As the last line of the table shows, the atmosphere is 0 to 3% water vapor. Before leaving this slide, I need to note that all of the percentages above would be by account of molecules rather than their weight. Speaking of weight, let's look at what those molecules weigh. We were just reminded that the atmosphere is mostly nitrogen, and the common molecular form comes in with a weight of 28 whatevers. It doesn't matter, we're just comparing relative weights. The next most common component is oxygen with nearly equal weight of 32. H2O, good old water vapor, is a relative lightweight at 18. That's almost 50% lighter than most of the atmosphere. And we see the 44 whatevers carbon dioxide is over 50% heavier than most of the atmosphere. Where I'm going with this is heavier stuff sinks while lighter stuff floats. We're very lucky oxygen is almost the same weight as nitrogen, or the vital oxygen we need to survive, might tend to concentrate high or low and out of reach of our nostrils. Thinking about how the hydrological cycle image showed water vapor rising, now we know why, because it's lighter than most of the atmosphere. By the same token, we can assume carbon dioxide mostly sinks because it's heavier than most of the atmosphere. So if any greenhouse gas is up there acting like a blanket to warm Earth, it's water vapor, not carbon dioxide. On that topic, how many times have we all heard the local weather person say it would stay warmer overnight than it might otherwise due to a covering of high cirrus clouds, also known as water vapor in the stratosphere, and then experience this effect? All that said, I'm well aware that heavier things like dust particles can be carried aloft and stay up there for some time. I'm simply illustrating tendencies here. Summarizing the last few slides, we would expect water vapor to be the most potent greenhouse gas because of the interaction with available outbound radiation and because of its placement high in the atmosphere and because it makes up a higher percentage of the atmosphere than any other greenhouse gas by far. Okay, at the outset of this presentation, I promised to change your mind about climate change and show you it's an easily and quickly fixed problem. So here's me calling it. I'm going to say climate change is driven by perturbations in the classic terrarium Earth hydrological cycle shown in the image above. These perturbations are typically driven by volcanism, but could also be driven by mass burning of organic and/or fossil fuels. Of late, that fossil fuel combustion has been a human activity, but it wasn't always so. The Great Permian extinction is reckoned to have been caused by lava getting into massive coal deposits in the Siberian traps and releasing a vast amount of carbon dioxide and water vapor, also some sulfur compounds and other things. So I'm going to take this graph and extrapolate it backwards through the ice core eras. And I'm going to keep in mind how the farting upward, or FU effect, has skewed the carbon dioxide measurements in the ice core data. And I'm going to accept the estimate of 200 to 300 years total skew reckoned by the serious people with PhDs. And I'm going to add the following tidbit from climate alarmists. Even if we stop producing carbon dioxide today, it would take 200 to 300 years for levels to return to normal. Then I'm going to explain this data thusly. Temperature follows atmospheric water vapor content around pretty much in real time. While carbon dioxide is basically inert in terms of causing warming, it is something of a reliable indicator of hydrological cycle perturbations occurring, which can't be plotted here. As the process co-generating extra water vapor and carbon dioxide decreases, the temperature follows the water vapor down in lockstep. Meanwhile, extra carbon dioxide takes a couple or few centuries to work itself out of the atmosphere. That's a simple explanation that actually fits the data. Okay, that's the what. Do I have any speculation about how warming is being caused? Looking again at this diagram and thinking about the local weather person's high cirrus cloud blanket, it might be reasonable to chalk up warming simply to placement of water vapor in the stratosphere and the radiative interaction previously discussed. This image certainly shows increasing water vapor in the stratosphere, but wouldn't much or even most of the extra water vapor coming out of power plants and cars near ground level just form clouds lower in the atmosphere and rain back down before ever reaching the stratosphere? Could be, unless humans had invented fossil fuel powered vehicles that flew all over the globe directly seeding the stratosphere with water vapor. Does that sound familiar? It really makes one wonder if this image is showing the growth of commercial airlines starting around 1950 and a huge number of World War II military flights during the 40s before that. I'm not sure air traffic alone would be enough to cause significant variation, but maybe it's possible. As I said, true water vapor is really not that common of a thing in our system. Also, the kind of super hot water vapor in discussion at ground level is very rare in the climate system. The only natural sources would be volcanoes, wildfires, and lightning. Maybe this kind of highly energetic water vapor simply acts differently and is more able to punch through the stratosphere than its lethargic cousins transpiring off plants or evaporating from ground level sources at ambient temperatures. And water vapor in the stratosphere may be something where a little goes a long way, as they say. Us amateurs would probably need to calculate the amount of water vapor produced by global aviation fuel consumption and compare that to the injection volume of Tonga Hunga to get some kind of handle on this. Personally, I think the fixation on radiative cooling may be nearly as misdirected as the carbon dioxide fixation. What do I mean? Looking at the lower left here, we see transpiration and evaporation. Like us humans sweating, these are cooling processes for the plants, ground, and water bodies, if they can occur, that is. There is a limit to how much water vapor can be held by air at a certain temperature. This is known as 100% relative humidity, since at ground level anyway, it's not 100% humidity everywhere all the time. This would indicate the true limit is set by the availability of water to air which is warm and dry enough to evaporate it, right? Maybe you've noticed steam coming from your car's exhaust pipe or a power plant smokestack in cold weather that seems to disappear. It doesn't disappear, it dissipates. That is, evaporates completely in the cold, dry air. This is air which might have difficulty evaporating an open water body or wet ground due to the low temperature, but which has now artificially become more humid. Conversely, if human injected water vapor were to inhibit transpiration or natural evaporation, then plants, soil, and water bodies would also have their ability to cool inhibited. A familiar example of inhibited evaporation causing warming is if you want a pot of water on the stove to boil faster, put a cover on it. Air coming into contact with any of these evaporation inhibited bodies in an interaction which would naturally produce a cooling effect on that air will now either be less cooled, not cooled, or even warmed by conduction. The mind reels with the possibilities. Over time, I have managed to convince myself water vapor must be causing climate change through both the much discussed radiative interactions plus these evaporation inhibiting and conductive interactions. Time for everybody else to start getting convinced so we can get on with effective solutions. So what? If we're doing it, we're doing it, and we got to stop. Not so fast. Removing carbon dioxide from exhaust streams is difficult and expensive. Removing water vapor from exhaust streams is fairly easy and cheap. Stopping carbon dioxide injection means a 200 to 300-year lag before CO2 levels are normal, and the temperature will follow after some thermal inertia in the system is overcome. Stopping water vapor injection means a few weeks or months to a couple or few years before those levels are normal, and the temperatures again would follow after thermal inertia is overcome. So it is a great and glorious day for mankind. Not only do we finally have a simple explanation for climate change that actually fits the data, but it also seems like a problem solvable with current or near future technology, which should rapidly start showing some signs the solutions are working. Furthermore, we may have found a source of fresh or refreshable water to the tune of 4.3 billion gallons per day. But what if the old truth terrorist is wrong? Very simply, and this cannot be overemphasized, me being wrong does not equal them being right. They are wrong, period. Now, do I expect a bunch of pushback over this presentation from those serious people with PhDs? Oh, yeah. Imagine you're one of the serious people with PhD who has spent your entire career telling anybody who would listen that mankind's carbon dioxide emissions are causing global warming. And now you've just gotten absolutely royally, rottenly pantsed by some internet clown. And to rub salt in the wound, he used your own data. You're either doing the Wicked Witch of the West death cry in The Wizard of Oz, I'm melting, melting, or you start blathering and slinging around a bunch of them $10 words, trying to save face and your research funding. Winston Churchill had a great quote about truth. Truth is incontrovertible. Panic may resent it, ignorance may deride it, malice may distort it, but there it is. So whether I have found a new truth about climate change or not, I cannot overemphasize this truth. Me being wrong does not equal them being right. They are wrong, period. Even if they were eventually able to repair the giant holes in their theory, they don't get to gamble with our lives and livelihoods on a hunch in the meantime. I'll repeat my earlier call to action. It is beyond my comprehension how these, let's call them climidiots, got this far with their carbon dioxide fixation and fantasy. The really sick thing is, by outlawing fossil fuel use, they could have accidentally fixed the problem without ever even having understood the problem. The people of this planet have a right to demand answers from their governments about why those governments have legislated mandates, spent hundreds of billions in taxes, and obligated trillions in taxes to be spent in the future, all in pursuit of trying to fix a problem they clearly do not understand. Again, they have no business gambling with our lives and livelihoods on a hunch. Climate change pseudoscience is yet another abuse of the scientific process like we saw during the COVID pandemic. If I was a young person, I would absolutely be effing raging by now that the same morons who locked me in my house for 2 years over a flu virus that had virtually no chance of really hurting me have also been cramming this climate change fairy tale down my throat since grade school. I would never, ever, ever give these idiots a chance to have any control over my life such as by voting any of their true believers into office. If necessary, strap your nearest rabid climate change psycho to a chair, a Clockwork Orange style, force them to watch this presentation, then make them explain their attitudes and actions. Before signing off here, I can't resist muddying the waters a little bit. As much as I want to believe my simple explanation, I hold open the possibility that it's wrong in consideration of an alternative explanation. The French mathematician and physicist Jean-Baptiste Joseph Fourier developed a method of analysis for complex waveforms that deconstructs them into sums of multiple regular cyclic waveforms. As the animation shows, adding together a set of pleasingly smooth cyclic waveforms can result in a complex waveform that does not closely resemble any of the child components. To me, the complex waveform here looks similar to the ice core data. We know Earth seasons, axial precession, and other processes are cyclical, so it seems reasonable to attempt a Fourier transform on the ice core data curve, then trying to identify various cyclical processes for each of the child curves. So thanks for your time and attention. Stay tuned for my future acts of truth terror. I destroyed Kamala Harris on the debate stage. George Floyd was not suffocated to death by a cop, and I'll give you a little preview of that one. Did you ever wrestle in high school gym class? Did you ever play American football on any level? Then you know one guy your size or smaller cannot position himself upon you such that you stop breathing without covering your nose and mouth, without strangling you, without breaking your windpipe, or even bruising you. The Deepwater Horizon oil spill, which some of you may remember from the Obama era, could not have polluted the Gulf of Mexico, despite all the panic at the time. We can drill our way out of high oil prices. You will not be able to keep your doctor or insurance. You will not have new high-paying jobs in green energy, and Obamacare will not save the average family $2,500 per year. Goodbye for now.